everyone's gone shy, so I'll say hello. DLJ currently in England, and no, we don't have any independent study operations.
Anyone else want to say their interest in the topic and where they're coming from, maybe?
I'll speak if that's all right.
Yeah,
I'm
go ahead.
Franklin. This is my second Tuesday night meeting here. Really enjoying the group. Trying to get on, or I've been on your Discord for a little while as well. Critical thinking.
Hello, everyone.
Hi there. Yeah,
Hey.
happy to learn. I hope I'm can contribute. So, yeah, here we go.
Oh, I thought I was I thought I was on mute.
That's okay.
Hello.
You want to introduce yourself and say where you're from?
Oh, sure. So my name is Christine, and I'm in Brooklyn, and so I am a member of the FTI, and this is my first time to join the Tuesday events, and nice to meet you all.
Oh, that's so exciting. Thank you. I'm happy to meet you.
You too.
Great. Welcome, Franklin and Christine. Good to see you. Anyone else want to give a quick intro, where you're coming from and what brings you to tonight's event?
Robert, I'm from Miami and I'm interested in the topic. Thank you.
Great. Welcome, Robert.
Did you want to say something, Adam?
Oh, I didn't know my mic was on, but I'll just go ahead. Hello, everyone. My name's Adam, coming from Colton, California, and I'm here to listen and learn. Thanks.
Will, you're really quiet today. Is it the time difference?
Me. Hello. My name's Will, land of Australia, part of the British colony. God save the king. And Garrett, I was watching a program recently with Sean Carroll. Are you aware of him, the physicist?
No.
He's a well-known physicist, and he's debating a Buddhist scholar who is the teacher of the psychologist that I recommended, Corey. So Corey's teacher is an assistant to the Dalai Lama, and he taught Corey the Buddhist philosophy and meditation techniques. And this Professor B. Alan Wallace, he's a professor of theology. He was debating Sean Carroll, the physicist. I can put the link in the chat later if anybody's interested, if that's okay. And the physicist was saying that we understand all the particles in the universe through particle physics, which is all new to me, but from smashing particles together in the Hadron Collider. But then he said, except for the particles which instantly vanish back into the ether once they've been created. So I was thinking about how that applies to, I don't know so much this topic of logic and critical thinking, but I thought on one hand he's saying we know all the particles in the universe, therefore there can be nothing beyond the physical realm. And then in the next sentence he said, except for the particles which instantly vanish back into the ether. Oh, and by the way, we don't know what dark energy is. So I was just thinking about how quickly we, even brilliant minds of physicists who quickly sort of justify their own stance on things. It's quite ludicrous and illogical. Anyway, God save the king.
We all have a desire to know, but the reason the first intention says to seek truth rather than to know the truth is because we have to remain humble enough to learn new things, and he doesn't seem to be that humble. He seems to think that he already knows it all, and unfortunately, that's going to prevent him from learning more. So, that
I
is
think
what it is.
I think he's just referring to the whole God of the gaps thing. That it's fairly safe to say we know a lot about the universe, not everything, but a lot. So any other theories about how the universe works, invoking religion or magic, do need to fit in with that. They have to fit in with that knowledge that we already have. So we don't have all the answers, but we do have a lot, and other things do need to fit into that.
Yeah, it was interesting that I don't know, I don't want to just shut me up, Garrett. I don't want to hijack the discussion with this. It might not be appropriate.
I don't want to digress onto a separate topic, but
yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think, the quote you said, Will, was what I was responding to. What you said, Bill, makes sense, but was not what I heard Will say, this person say. That said, I don't want to digress on a separate topic. But a God of the God of the gaps argument would be a good topic for another night. We sort of already did it, to be honest, is like my presentation on how science and religion can get along, which is more or less what Bill said, which is if science has a really good answer, accept science's answer is right. And when science doesn't have a good answer, feel free to choose your paradigm to answer that question, because there's no consistent good answer to that question right now anyway. So make your best guess at that point. So. But the funny part about that is, if I'm right, the God of the gaps argument is actually a valid argument because it's okay to use God when there's a gap. That doesn't mean it's always going to be the answer. But actually, if my logical argument with Gödel's incompleteness theorem is right, there will always be some gap between what science can prove versus what is actual reality. And if so, there really is a true gap that is unfillable by science due to the nature that science is consistent. But again, that is kind of a topic for another night. So anyone else want to do an introduction and what brings them to talk about critical thinking skill? Dominic.
Hi there, Dominic here. I'll be on camera soon. Thanks for hosting. Always love these evenings. Yeah, I am looking forward to. It's sort of a meta topic, right? We always try to apply our critical thinking skills, and you encourage us always to do that. And now we talk about how to actually do that, or I don't know where you're taking us, but yeah, looking forward to it. And yeah, in general, I'm part of many conversation groups like this, and I enjoy just to intellectualize everything. So yeah, so looking forward to things. Thank you.
Great. Good to have you back, Dominic. Anyone else want to go?
Actually, I'll just throw in a.
Oh, go
I'll
ahead.
just throw in a quick comment.
Yeah, go ahead.
If, for anybody who's interested in Sean Carroll, I actually belong to a physics meetup, and we regularly, basically once a month, listen to one of his lectures. He's got like dozens of lectures on various topics, particles, dark matter, all that kind of stuff. And he covers in each, it's like a lecture format. So he's quite brilliant. He's got a lot of knowledge about physics, obviously. I won't comment on his metaphysics knowledge, but yeah, certainly if anybody's interested in learning about physics topics, he's a wonderful source of education.
Cool.
How can we get the link to that? Is that all right? Can you post a link?
Yeah, I'll try to find it. I'm not sure. Yeah, okay. Let me see. They might be paid lectures, but we do it through a meetup group. But if you can scrounge something, off YouTube or something like that, or just do a Google search for Sean Carroll, he's really, looking for shorts that he's putting out would be good.
He was on a TV program here actually, and he is quite prolific on YouTube as well. There's loads of stuff on, and he was on a TV program here, sort of a discussion show, and they were asking audience members or people, the public, to submit questions to him. And I submitted the question, can you please ask him what his thoughts are on the emergence of reality, something from nothing, or having existed infinitely without first cause. Does he think this can ever be solved? And I watched in anticipation that they would ask him my question. However, the question they did ask him, as most popular from all the audience members, was, where do all the odd socks go to in the washing machine? And
the quantum foam, the quantum foam of socks.
So disappointed. Of all the things they could have asked him, they asked him that.
But Will, we've discussed this. The lost sock universe starting theory is valid.
My grandfather.
Yeah, it's your great grandson. You confusing a time machine for a washing machine.
He was actually my great grandfather was a
part of. They've all warped into the 11th dimension.
There's one now floating through the ether.
Exactly. Through the ether.
Well, socks are proof that the multiverse exists, clearly. So are Tupperware lids.
And there could be, according to Garrett's and we're not sure who came up with the idea first, theory, infinite universes if the Big Bang is not local to our known universe, and Big Bangs may have been occurring infinitely prior to this moment in time. And our observable universe may not be the only one, as Neil deGrasse Tyson said when asked what keeps him awake at night. He said there could be other observable universes which we will never observe, functioning with the same laws of physics as we have. However, we'll never see them because everything's expanded. And there is one thing that travels faster than the speed of the light that we know of, but nobody ever mentions it. And that is the expansion of the universe. The universe is expanding faster than the speed of light. But physicists say nothing can travel faster than the speed of light. What do you think of that, Bill? Anyway, we're digressing, but I thought this was just like polite chat. I'd like to ask Bill about that later.
It's social.
That's okay. It's very fun chat. Garrett, did you want to start soon?
Yeah. I do think that the one part that Neil deGrasse Tyson gets wrong is I think that if we don't destroy ourselves on Earth, we will eventually see the remnants of other Big Bangs, because we'll be able to, interstellarly travel and be able to see the edges of our universe collide with the edges of other Big Bangs, and they'll start to form black holes, and we'll have to, navigate our way between those, crashing, black hole creations and the collisions, and try to find a safe, and by that time, navigating that situation will be trivial. But I do think that we will eventually, if we can survive that long, see the edges of the other Big Bangs. So that said, let's go ahead and get started for tonight's session. So, sorry, was there something someone wanted to say?
Sorry, forgot I wasn't muted.
No problem. So, thanks everyone for coming tonight. My name is Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor, now an entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I'm also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you tonight's event. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We focus on helping members be the best version of themselves, seek truth, and to be fair through transformational personal and professional development. We have free events like this one on Tuesday evenings, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry. And we have members-only events every week where we apply practical wisdom into our daily lives. And we help each other between those events as well. We have only one rule in the FTI, and that is to remain polite. So let's all try to keep calm, cool, and collected, because when we get emotional, we usually make bad decisions and we don't think rationally. And so by staying polite, we'll keep everybody thinking rationally, which is where human beings are at our best. Rather than trying to prove other people wrong, I recommend asking them why they came to the conclusion they did. We call that listening to understand in the FTI, to try to empathize with people and see where they're coming from. we learn a lot more by listening to other people that disagree with us than we do by trying to tell them that they're wrong. And it's also usually a better way to convince them if we understand where they're coming from before we actually try to explain why they might be wrong. And usually even doing that is better done through questions than Socratic method. So that said, tonight we're kicking off a series of discussions, lecture discussions, really. All of our events are lecture discussions. I'm just realizing I only have one monitor. I'm helping family out, so I'm away from my normal 3-monitor setup. And so let me share my screen, and I will just try to do this without, let's see if this works. Can you see my screen now? All right, cool. So we're going to kick off a series of conversations, and I'm going to give you a roadmap of what we're going to cover in critical thinking skills. I, as a computer scientist, learned how to break problems down to their components. And so we're breaking critical thinking down into a bunch of components and handling them one at a time. Although today we'll delve a little bit into component number 2, but that's because I think it's an important part of component number 1 to sort of have a little bit of awareness of number 2. So today's agenda is going to be, what is research? What is information literacy? Why are they important? What makes a source trustworthy, which we're going to spend a bit of time on. And then a little bit of practical advice for information seeking. And then we'll talk a little bit about ethical use of data, which is also a precursor to our last session, which is going to be on wisdom. Speaking of which, this is kind of the roadmap. Is it showing? It's not showing my my video screens, right? I don't think so. I think it hides that. So basically we're going to start with research and information literacy, which is gathering data and information. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what sources are trustworthy there, although we're mostly going to focus on that in session 2, which is evidence evaluation. Once we have what we consider valid information, we're going to talk about how you can use formal logic that, given valid information, valid assumptions, you can use logic to come to conclusions that are 100% valid if your assumptions are valid. And so as long as you do a good job in these 2 categories, formal logic will get you a lot of knowledge of objective reality, and it will also help build a foundation for wisdom. But another thing that we need to be aware of when we're evaluating evidence and thinking about how to draw conclusions from evidence is our natural biases, because we all have natural psychological biases. And so we'll talk about that in the 4th session. And then from those biases, we're going to have different types of inference, which are ways of drawing conclusions. Biases can sometimes steer us wrong, which is why this falls off a cliff here, where the things falling off the cliff are misunderstandings and sort of leading us in the wrong direction, where biases can sometimes lead us in the wrong direction, but being aware of our biases can help us build knowledge and wisdom. Similarly, types of inference may sometimes lead to the wrong conclusions, and we'll talk about which types of inference will lead us to the more consistent conclusions, and which ones have what risks and what are the pros and cons of the different types of inference. Fallacies will always lead you in, I don't want to say that. Fallacies will almost always lead you in the wrong direction. Maybe always, I haven't fully thought through whether or not it's 100%, but it's always invalid logic. But sometimes you may actually fall into the right solution. I don't know, I'd have to think about it. But basically fallacies are, misunderstandings of logic. It's like corrupted version of formal logic. It's basically bad logic. And so we'll talk about the different common types of fallacies. We're also not going to discuss all the hundreds of biases. We're going to talk about the most common types of biases and the ones that impact people. And then all of that helps us build this knowledge of objective reality, which is understanding the objective world that we live in, from which we can then build on the top of the pyramid. It's not exactly a pyramid, but it's like a building. Think of this as like a building where you're building up and up, and then you have wisdom. And I would argue wisdom serves 2 purposes. First, that we should prevent significant unnecessary harm for all human beings. And then second, that we should increase happiness and decrease harm. And I'll try to make the argument that those are pretty good things to go after in that order of priority, where the first one is the first priority that we should always do. for everyone. And then the second one is like a, the thing that we should strive for whenever possible. And so we'll get more specific about all of this stuff tonight. This is just a very high level overview of the next 2 months of lecture discussions. With that said, we're going to hold questions until the end. People have asked to do that so that they can hear the perspective that's presented. And then after the presentation, which is usually about half an hour, although some of these may go closer to 45 minutes or maybe even as much as an hour. And after the presentation, we'll have conversation about it, and people can question assumptions, come up with alternative opinions, ask questions, whatever people want to do. It's open conversation. So what is research? So basically it's the definition is a systematic investigation to discover new knowledge or validate existing information. It's a critical skill for academics, professionals, and lifelong learners. It's basically how you gather data to learn. And then
Lazio, we're not divorcing, we're gonna still stay in the same house, but live, live separate.
So I think they didn't mean to be off mute. So I think I made a couple other people moderators. If you can help with that, it would be great. Let me I have to move my windows around. Having only one monitor is rough. So information literacy is basically identifying, locating, evaluating, and effectively using information from various sources. Information literacy is also a part of critical thinking skills that looks at the quality of information, how relevant it is, and how credible it is. And I'll spend a bit of time on that because fake news is out there. And I want to help teach the skills to help people understand what sources are credible, since there are a lot of non-credible sources out there, and it's really important to have the critical thinking skills to discern which is which, because actually studies show that fake news travels faster than real news, and that's because it's more shocking. And so people go, oh my God, that can't be, I have to share it with everybody, without actually checking whether or not it's real, because they haven't used their critical thinking skills to discern whether or not the source is a credible source. So we want to teach how to discuss, how to understand if a source is credible, where you're getting information from. There's also ethical considerations. Ethical considerations. We're not going to go into plagiarism, copyright, and proper citation. We're going to talk about overall ethics. And then information literacy really wants to help people understand how to work in the modern age. We live at a time that more information is at our fingertips than has ever been true in the rest of human history. And it's all just in our phone. That it's obviously not in our phone, but it's all accessible from our phone, from anywhere in the world that we go that has 3G, 4G, or 5G. So why is it important? It really helps people discern fact from fiction. And, like I said, it prevents the spread of misinformation and sources that may have a bias and only spread misinformation to propagate their own bias. We held another event on confirmation bias, and a lot of people have so much confirmation bias that they're willing to lie blatantly in order to serve, basically continue to feed their confirmation bias. And we don't want to fall prey to that. There's also a psychological phenomena where if a fact or a purported fact is repeated enough times, people will start to believe it, even if it has no credibility. And so it's important to be aware of that. I don't think that's in any of my critical thinking slides. So I'm going to mention it now because just because you hear something 30 times doesn't mean that it's true. You have to know that the sources are not biased and that the sources are credible in order, and that, and we'll go into the sorry, I'm not used to having this, I'm navigating on my keyboard instead of my mouse. So enabling effective communication is a part of why information literacy is important. You want to have, it's really good to be a lifelong learner. I think all of you probably are, which is why you're here tonight. Since you're not getting a degree for this and you're not getting paid for it. So you're looking to learn, which is great. That's, seeking truth is part of the first intention, as I mentioned. So that's what we're here for, is to try to help each other seek truth. And then we want to help evaluate new information so that as new information comes in, we can evaluate it and understand where our current understanding is wrong. And that's where being aware of confirmation bias, which we'll get into in the biases, is important, so that we can look for new truths that show why our current beliefs may be wrong and there's a better way to think or a better piece of information out there than what we currently believe. So components of information literacy, identifying what are the needs and the research questions is the first step. Locating information from diverse sources. We're going to talk about some sources that are good at searching for information, and then and some of the pros and cons of using the different ones. Evaluating the quality, relevance, and credibility of information. We'll get into that in detail. And then effectively using and synthesizing information for various purposes, which we'll talk a little bit more about, I think, next week. And then lastly, we'll talk about ethical use of information. We're not going to go into citation and attribution, although those are important, but that's not going to be the primary focus. But I think we all know that we should cite and note where we get our information from in order to give the original sources credibility or credit for being the source of that information. So we're going to go into a Google Doc here on what makes information trustworthy. And so let me maneuver things around a little bit. So basically, I came up with a list in priority order of what makes something or someone a trustworthy source. And so first is if someone is giving you information that goes against their best interest. If so, it's highly likely that they're credible, because most people, they don't have a reason to share things that are against their best interest. And so if they are, they probably care more about the truth than their own interest. And doing that gives a high level of credibility. If you know what's in their best interest and you know what their motives are, which there's always question marks there, that there may be something that you don't know. But if you do know about what their motives are and they're sharing something, if the plumber comes over and says, oh, this is really easy, it took me 5 minutes to fix, I'm not going to charge you anything. Probably the plumber is being honest about that, right? Because it's not in his best interest to just say, oh, I fixed this really easily and I'm not going to charge you anything. So so if people are polite and honest about something, I would argue that there are a few paradigms here where if people are polite when they're interacting with others, it shows a certain level of keeping in the reason-based part of the brain. So there are 3 parts of the brain we've talked about in past events: is the cerebrum, which is the reason-based part of the brain. There's the emotional part of the brain, which is the mammalian, and then there's the reptilian, which is fight or flight. Those last 2 are usually compelling us to do things that are not good ideas. Whereas people who remain polite are usually in the reason-based part of the brain, and so that gives a higher level of credibility. If they are not honest and not polite, then they're probably not very trustworthy. And so you want to pay attention to the trend of whether or not someone has been honest historically. And if they are dishonest and impolite, then they're the least trustworthy people. If they're so polite that they're not honest, then that also makes someone less trustworthy, because some people just don't want conflict. And so they won't tell you that you have ketchup on your chin because they feel like it's impolite to let you know that. But quite frankly, I'd want to know if I have ketchup on my chin. So I appreciate the friends that tell me that I do. And that's why I try to surround myself with friends that want to seek truth and will help me be the best version of myself, which is what we do in the FTI, rather than just people who, you know, won't be honest and will be so polite that they're not honest. And so that's step number 2, is the second least trustworthy. If someone's brutally honest and not polite, well, they're probably, you know, telling you their honest perspective, but they may be coming from an emotional place and they may not be super accurate in their assessment. And so, you know, you also need to be careful what you tell these people, because they may not be sensitive to the way that they share information. And so you kind of have to be a little cautious with that type of person. Whereas if someone is always honest and polite, those are the people that, you know, I try to surround myself with, because they value both truth and personal development. Now, I think paying attention to whether people make logical arguments when we go through all these critical thinking sessions in the next couple months, you know, look at the different techniques that are out there and pay attention to the people who use them and use them effectively, because the people who use them effectively are people that you can trust, and the organizations that use them effectively are organizations you trust. You know, the sources that use them effectively. If someone has safe assumptions in their arguments, that's a good sign of trust. If they use good rules of inference, which I talked about, the types of inference, and then also formal logic, which are different types of, which is kind of another type of inference. Then if they're using those well, then that increases trust. And then if they can prove something new and interesting, that you know, based on valid assumptions and good logic, then those people have a lot of credibility. And if they have a trend of doing that, that makes them very credible. The next thing is, like, whose judgment does someone tell you to rely on? Someone says, trust me, you know, just trust me. It may not make sense to you, but just trust me. Unless it's a super urgent situation where, you know, it's like, you know, jump off that creaky board because it's going to break and put you down a pit. Like, other than that, like, if someone says, just trust me, don't trust your own judgment, be very skeptical of that person, right? You should really trust people who, you know, like the Buddha, who I follow in his footsteps, and I try to tell everybody to trust their own judgment. That's why the third intention is to teach critical thinking skills, so people can learn to rely on their own judgment, because I ultimately think all of you should rely on your own judgment. You shouldn't believe what I say just because I say it. You should believe it because it makes sense to you and it resonates with you. And if it doesn't resonate with you, then you should reject it. You should really trust yourself, and you should be brutally honest with yourself so that you can learn to trust yourself with, you know, a very high degree of accuracy, where, you know, you're always being so honest with yourself that you can trust yourself in every situation. And that also means recognizing your biases and being aware of those, et cetera, et cetera. But anyone who tells you to trust them over yourself, you know, that, be skeptical of those people. People who tell you to trust your own judgment but make convincing arguments are the people who are trustworthy. Then do people know what they don't know? A lot of people, and I made a comment, kind of a snarky comment, about the physicist who said, oh, we already know all the particles that matter in the universe. Like, we're not going to learn anything new. Well, then why do you need more budget for another Large Hadron Collider, right? Like, the whole point is that we're supposed to be learning about new particles. Like, even most physicists, you know, would agree that we're still discovering new particles in the universe. And so saying we already know all the answers, to me, is something that is an acknowledgement that that person doesn't know what they don't know. They don't recognize that they don't know what they don't know. They don't recognize that they have more to learn. Those of us that acknowledge that, you know, sure, I may know a lot, but there's lots of stuff I don't know. And I'm also open that any of the things that I do know may be wrong. And having that level of humility, there's a great book called Humility is the New Smart. And it explains why, if you don't have the humility to acknowledge that some of what we currently know may be wrong, then you're not going to learn new things, and you're not going to see your blind sides and your mistakes. And so people who can openly acknowledge what issues they don't know about are more trustworthy. And people who are willing to acknowledge that they're wrong when it's clear that they're wrong are also more trustworthy. And I don't have that written here, but I'm going to say it out loud. And then how knowledgeable is someone in the area that they're talking about? I don't love an argument from authority. You know, I am a physicist, you know, I'm a computer science major. So if I tell you something about computer science, you should just trust me. Again, I don't trust those types of people. If I am a computer scientist and I know something because I'm a computer scientist, I will explain it to you in ways that you can understand, because, you know, like Einstein said, if you understand something well enough, you can explain it to a 6-year-old. If you don't know it well enough to explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't really know it that well. And so, you know, knowing, you know, that someone is an expert in something, but that they can also explain it to other people, is you know, a key element of trustworthiness from a source. If you read an article from the news and it just doesn't make sense, even if the person is credible, then be skeptical. And then, does the person tell you things that are helpful to you, right? People who are giving you information that helps you grow, learn, and develop, increases credibility. If someone says something that is clearly against your current opinion, and this may sound a little bit counterintuitive, but if so, you know, you want to ask yourself if the opinion is in their best interest. If it's not, then add a lot of credibility to that, because if someone tells you something that goes against your current opinion and doesn't agree with their confirmation bias, or isn't in their best interest to tell you, that person is, you know, ready to rub you the wrong way in order to tell you something that you disagree with. A lot of people don't like conflict, so they're not going to tell you things that you disagree with. And this is also something that's not in their best interest to share. So that is extremely credible. But if it is in their best interest or neutral, then feel free to fact check it from objective sources. And people who are consistently giving you information that disagrees with your current opinion, but you know, helps you learn, are great people to surround yourself with, because, you know, being around people who will be willing to challenge your opinion, are the ones that help you, you know, learn the most, because they're willing to tell you where you have confirmation bias, or where you're maybe stuck in something that is a bad idea that's not serving you well. So basically, you know, looking at, for certain sources, especially media sources, you know, fact check, you know, right, left, and center, and see which ones are consistently honest and which ones are consistently making stuff up that can't be corroborated with by anyone that doesn't have their bias. And if an entity or a group of entities with similar backgrounds are consistently telling the truth, or consistently lying, then you should increase or decrease their credibility accordingly. If someone is trying too hard to convince you, you know, I was buying a used car, and this is, you know, I love the used car salesman joke, although I've had friends that were used car salesmen that were honest, but this one particular one was not. And when I was braking in this car, it was making a funny noise, and he goes, "Oh, that's just rust, because we haven't driven it recently." And I had a gut feel that this didn't make sense, right? Like, if he's test driving this car, why is he not driving it around regularly? Like, why is it not driven for a long time? And so I didn't end up buying that car. And then when I got home, I was like, well, let me just fact check this thing. Well, it turns out that car, what was happening is the car was like stuttering. And it turns out that car regularly does that in that model. But a newer model didn't do that, and we ended up buying the same car in a newer model that didn't have that problem. Well, he was trying really hard to convince me that you know, that car was fine and I shouldn't worry about it. And so I was a little bit skeptical, because when a used car salesman is trying really hard to convince you of something, well, you know, you should be concerned. They should be willing to walk away. So they, you know, it is possible that they may have a helpful truth for the person that they're trying to convince. Some people are fully convinced of their own belief, and so they try really hard to convince someone. But you know, it's worth being open to the possibility that they're right, but you want to look at all the items above about whether or not they're you know, have a consistent history and whether or not it's in their best interest, etc. But they may also be stuck in their ways, and they may be stuck in their own confirmation bias. and trying to convince others that what they believe is right to reinforce their current belief, because a lot of us want reaffirmation that our current beliefs are right, and convincing other people that we're right is a way of reaffirming our current beliefs. And then for me, the strength of a suggestion should be commensurate with the severity of the issue. If someone's working really hard to convince you of something that doesn't seem that important to you, then maybe they are, there's sort of something wrong with that, right? Like if it's not a major something that matters in day-to-day life and day-to-day decisions, then it shouldn't be something that someone has to work really hard to convince you of. Now, I don't want to give my example there, but someone suggesting something with less emphasis is generally, something that I think should be trusted more, because they're leaving you to your own judgment, right? And they're saying, here's something, if it makes sense to you, take it or leave it. Although I would encourage you, if you disagree with someone who does this, ask them questions to understand where they're coming from, to see why they believe what they believe, and see if they have a good reason for believing it. If it turns out they have a better reason for their belief than you do for yours, change your mind. There's nothing wrong with that. I like to say, when you admit you're wrong with good judgment, you're immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before, when you were actually wrong. And the only time we're really wrong is when we keep saying we're right when it's clear that we're wrong. That said, if you are, considering making a very potentially harmful decision, then understand that someone may actually come to you with a very strong opinion, saying, with strong emphasis that you should not make this decision that's going to end up causing you a lot of harm, because they feel really strongly about protecting you from the decision you're about to make. And so listen with an open mind, see if they may have credibility. So flattery could be good or bad. When someone flatters you, you can't just immediately trust them. And a lot of people do that. And flattery is often used in the political world to gain favor with people. They'll say someone is so smart or so amazing, when really they're just trying to get on their good side, and they usually flatter with pleasantries and not actual honest compliments of what someone has done well. And so you basically want to analyze, why are they flattering you? And you might even ask them to understand what they mean by it, or where they're coming from, and see if they understand why they're flattering you. And if they don't, well, they may just be trying to boost up your ego. And that's not, if it's not a flattery that's commensurate with your accomplishments and efforts, then you want to understand that they're probably just trying to get on your good side rather than give you a sincere compliment. And so that's generally something that deceptive people use to try to make themselves endeared to someone that they're trying to influence. Now, if someone flatters you, but the praise is actually commensurate with your accomplishments, then be proud of that, right? Then they're actually acknowledging something that's good about you and something that you've done well, and they're just trying to lift you up, and that should increase their trust, because not everybody takes the time to recognize other people for their strengths. And so it's important that if someone's flattering you, try to understand whether or not that flattery is accurate, or whether or not it's meant to get you on their good side, and they're just making up words to try to get you to do what they want, which is usually what comes next when someone gives insincere flattery. So that's everything on trustworthy sources. That goes for people, but also news sources, et cetera, et cetera. So it's covers a wide range of any kind of information source, essentially. So I also like to say a 360 analysis to find objective truth is a good approach, which means you want to look for sources with various types of bias. So if we're talking about political bias in the US, you would look at right-wing sources, left-wing sources, and centrist sources about the same article. And we did this before the war in Ukraine broke out. We did this on the saber rattling that was going on in the Ukraine, and we read sources from all three perspectives, And then we fact checked the things that sounded weird. And it turns out that one of those three actually gave a lot of misinformation. I won't say which one. You can go back, and if anyone wants that recording, you can ask me and I can give you the unedited one, although hopefully we'll have a volunteer video editor soon. Actually, I think Christina is going to be our volunteer video editor, and hopefully we'll get these videos up. And basically, if you fact check the things that sound suspicious, you'd be surprised. Like the things that I found that were lies almost always sound suspicious on the surface, and things that sound suspicious on the surface are almost always lies. So it's actually, if you trust your gut with this, like as you fact check more and more, you'll learn that your intuition is probably right more often than you'd guess. You really want to consider, vetted or non-controversial facts, in your analysis of a situation, because if you haven't vetted the fact or purported fact, or it's not non-controversial, then it's suspect. And so it's something that's suspect, you want to vet. And then once it's vetted, if it passes vetting, then you can trust it. This will help you kind of see objective reality for what it is more effectively, by getting a 360-degree analysis, which means looking at it from all perspectives. And politics is just one way of perspective. Now, we were talking about a science versus religion debate in the social. Well, that's another time that, take people that that are religious, spiritual, and neither, and get all three of their perspectives on a topic, and then try this perspective where when something sounds suspicious, try fact checking it. And then you're going to come to a clearer view of the truth by getting the various perspectives that people can offer, rather than surrounding yourself with people who simply agree with you, because echo chambers aren't good for anyone. It just spreads misinformation in large groups of people. And so it's really important to surround yourself with people with different perspectives, and don't just tell them why they're wrong and why you're right. Just listen to them with an open mind and understand where they're coming from. You learn so much more from doing that, and being in a diverse community like the FTI, where we try to have people from all different backgrounds, religious, spiritual, science-based, atheist, and left, right, center. We want to be a very diverse community that welcomes everybody, and where we learn from each other. So some ways to research about objective reality, different ways of gathering information. My favorite ones are ChatGPT, which you do have to remember sometimes fabricates things. It is an AI, and it's a predictive modeling based AI. And so there are times where ChatGPT just makes stuff up. I think that's technically called hallucinations by ChatGPT. So you have to be aware of that. But when people tell me, well, ChatGPT makes stuff up, it's an invalid source, my answer is, when have you met a human being that doesn't sometimes make stuff up? Now, the human being may not be doing it intentionally. They could be a super honest person, but they still sometimes have misunderstandings. We all do. And so, yes, ChatGPT gets stuff wrong sometimes, but so does everybody, and so does every other source. The other ways that I like to research stuff is Googling things. And ChatGPT, by the way, can be a very powerful way of combining very complex criteria together to find things that you would not otherwise find in as quick of a time as ChatGPT will help you find them. Googling things, of course, is probably everybody's favorite way to do it, unless they've already gotten familiar with ChatGPT, in which case that may have replaced Google, which is why Google is a bit afraid of ChatGPT. And you do have to remember that there are a lot of ads. There are a lot of firms that help, basically collect a lot of money to get different websites to the top of Google search results, and they're trying to sell you something. And so you have to have some skepticism with Google, because even though Google's algorithm is very good, they are gameable, and there's so much money in being at the top of a Google search that it is something to be skeptical of. And I apparently forgot to turn off the annotating. So let me just drawings. Okay. So there we go. So so asking experts. So if you ask experts on a subject their opinion, and as you get to know more people, which I recommend, you know, meeting people in the FTI online community, meet people in other networking scenarios, and you know, meet people who are experts at different areas, and keep a spreadsheet of those people and what they're experts at, and then reach out to them when you have a question about their area of expertise. It's great to have a brain trust. You know, I do that, and I also have individual communities that I'm a part of that have experts in different fields, and I reach out to those people when I have questions in those areas, because you know, it's good to have trusted experts in different areas. So let me go to the next slide. So some ways to research about wisdom, which is, you know, the things that I talked about before were about objective reality. But if you're looking for wisdom, it's a little bit different. Religious, spiritual, and philosophical teachers are great sources of wisdom. You know, I use knowledge as learning about objective reality, whereas wisdom is about making better decisions. And I consider better decisions the ones that first minimize unnecessary, significant unnecessary harm for all people, and then second, increase happiness and decrease harm for the people we can influence. And I'll try to make a good argument for that on the last discussion about critical thinking skills, about why that's a good definition for wisdom. And then I consider myself a philosophical teacher, so you're welcome to reach out to me if you have questions. And you may, you know, like many people, when they ask me questions, it provides inspiration for an essay, which often turns into an event at some point. And I may already have an essay on whatever topic you're asking about, in which case I'll share it with you. I've shared a lot in the online community and the reference channel. And then meet other people who are teachers in various aspects. And we'll talk more in the coming weeks about, you know, the different ways of discerning wisdom from folly, and the Cliffs Notes version is what I just described. So benefits of information literacy: it helps people make well-informed decisions in both personal, academic, and professional contexts in all aspects of our lives. And then it empowers critical thinking. It's kind of the fuel that critical thinking uses. It's the data that that we can draw conclusions from. And it helps, you know, make your problem solving skills be based on actual facts, and valid data, valid assumptions. And then it enhances the research abilities, and it also helps academically, since in most academic areas, you need to be able to research. And then it creates a foundation for lifelong learning and continuous personal development, which is what the FTI is largely about: being the best version of ourselves as part of the first intention, and seeking truth and being fair. And then it helps you be aligned with objective reality. And I will say that is to all of our benefit. It's when we are no longer aligned with objective reality that problems start to come in, because when we have misunderstandings and we make decisions based on those misunderstandings, we make bad decisions and we think they're good decisions. And you know, you know, what's an example? You know, like I didn't, I should have written down an example, but just say, you know, say you're a homeowner, right? And someone breaks into your home and you have a gun. Well, you take your gun out and you're going to defend your homestead, and you think that the person that's coming in is not armed, and you aim your gun at them, but they already had one aimed at you and they were coming around the corner and they shot first before you even got the chance to pull the trigger. You know, there your misunderstanding about whether the person coming into your house had a gun ended up getting you killed. And maybe they wouldn't have shot you if they didn't see you with a gun. And theoretically, the reason you owned a gun was to keep yourself safe, and actually having the gun is what got you killed. And so there are all kinds of misunderstandings that can even end our lives in the worst case scenario, but most of the time they just end up causing us harm. or decreasing our happiness. And then it also helps identify the credible sources where you can learn wisdom to make better decisions. And all of the critical thinking skills we talk about will help us discover how to get more knowledge and wisdom. That's ultimately what critical thinking skills are in the service of. Critical thinking skills are not the end itself. They're a tool for the purpose of learning wisdom and knowledge. Really, knowledge first, and then wisdom builds on knowledge. Ethical use of data, I'm going to just say it quickly, is if you use data in the service of what I talked about being wisdom, I would call that ethical use of data, although to the point earlier, proper citation, etc., is also about ethical use of data. If you use data that you get from a source, you should credit that source with being your source of that data. Academics love citations, and really important in academia, especially. Although it's useful and it's recommended in all walks of life. So that said, I would love feedback if people would write in the chat whether or not this was helpful. Did you learn anything new? Did you find it to be useful? And I'm going to stop the screen share and I'm going to take a look at the chat. And I welcome any questions, any comments, and DLJ.
Yeah, hi. Thank you. Always good. Are you familiar with something called information quality criteria?
Not offhand, so go ahead and describe it.
Okay, there's a few frameworks out there for information governance, usually for corporate use, obviously, corporate governance and then IT governance. And there's one that actually I find quite useful as a sort of human checklist and not just for corporations as well. I found one while you were chatting. I thought I'll find one. So I'll put it in the chat. This is a slightly older version, but I think it's still valid. Take a look at it when you feel like it. But obviously, where they say reputation, what they're talking about is what you were talking about, which is the source. So is it well sourced? So accuracy, relevance. But they have a whole bunch of other things, such as, is it enough information or is it too much information? All that kind of stuff. Right? So there's about 15 sub-criteria, 3 main criteria. Pretty useful checklist. Always useful when your boss sends you an email with a big attachment and says, what do you think? You send that list back and you say, what do I think about what? If they don't reply, then that means they've sent it to somebody else, which is really what you want, right? Anyway, there you go. That might be useful for you.
Yeah, it is. This is a great list from my scan of it. I think actually I covered a lot of this stuff, but it's just in different words, quite frankly. But yeah, it's a really good list to use.
Cool.
Thanks for sharing, DLJ. Anyone else? Bill, go ahead. You're on mute, Bill.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was actually trolling what DLJ said, and I ended up in Safari instead of Zoom and had to bounce back here. Really good presentation. I liked it. I don't know if you touched on anecdotal evidence versus quantitative evidence, which I think is an important thing to discuss. So specifically, if an anecdotal evidence would be, oh, my brother told me something, or a news report that says somebody was harmed by this, but after doing something, and there's not necessarily and so the assumption then is that there's a causal connection there, but is there a causal connection? What do studies show there, et cetera, et cetera. So for instance, the traditional one there is, vaccines cause autism, and you hear a lot of anecdotal evidence that is taken seriously over some very qualitative and quantitative studies that say different. So what really matters there is really what's the large scale amount of data that I can base my conclusions on. And then the other thing I think is worth talking about, and again, I'm not sure if you covered this, but the concept of what's required for a claim to be true. So, for instance, if my claim involves invoking a conspiracy at some point, then that claim is immediately suspect and should be, further investigated. And the classic case of this is, say, fake news. So if somebody claims, like Donald Trump's favorite, anything that disagrees with me is fake news, people buy into it. But that the thing to do there is to sort of take a step back and say, okay, it's possible, but what would be in place for this thing to be true, this claim to be true? The only way that this is true is if a whole industry of journalists who went to journalism school, and the vast majority of whom are interested in uncovering truths, is ganging up and deliberately creating a huge world where nobody disagrees with each other on things that are fake. And that would be an insane structure to try to maintain, and it's just literally impossible to do. To say every journalist around the world is getting together in a room somewhere and saying, "Hey, let's all post this," or let's all disagree with Donald Trump because he's right, but we want him to be wrong, right? That's a huge aspect as well. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw those two things out there because I think they are valuable and good kind of rounding questions for, is what I'm looking at here, really true, or is it just something somebody's saying versus, or is it, part of a conspiracy theory that is required to make it true?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And you reminded me of one of our rules, which is try to limit to one question or comment per time you raise your hand. And I'm not trying to pick on you. I forgot to say it this time. So, but in general, for everybody, let's try to limit to one question or comment, because otherwise we get too long in the back and forth with each individual. But that said, we don't have a lot of hands up, so it's fine. But then I just have to take notes. But as far as anecdotal evidence, I agree with you, Bill. You have to take that within a grain of salt. But what I would do is use anecdotal evidence to seek statistics about the things you're hearing anecdotes about, and see whether or not you can back up the anecdote with statistical evidence. And if you can back up the anecdote with statistical evidence, then, oh wait, maybe it's credible. And the reason I didn't bring up anecdotal evidence is because it's going to be in inference types. Because one of the inference types, I haven't memorized all the names, unfortunately. I think it's shoot, I don't want to guess and be wrong. So but we're going to cover when you take, I remember the concepts better than the names. I'm a concepts guy, not a names guy. So when you take a couple of specific data points and then you create a general rule from it, is one of the inference types. If you get a bunch of anecdotal evidence and you try to create a general rule from it, sometimes that's valid and sometimes that's not. And that's where, you need to have caution when you're trying to create general rules from specific data points, and make sure that your data points are sourced in a consistent, valid, objective way. Because if you're sourcing from a biased source, then you're going to end up with a biased conclusion rather than an objective conclusion. So I think you're right to be bringing it up here, Bill. And so I'm glad you did bring it up, because I'm just saying why I didn't cover it yet, but I'm glad we are covering it tonight, because it is a part of information gathering that if you're going to get anecdotal evidence, make sure you don't only get anecdotal evidence from an echo chamber, because you're going to find all the anecdotes agree with each other, because everyone tells only the stories that agree with the echo chamber, because no one feels comfortable giving an alternative perspective. And so you're not going to hear the truth from that echo chamber. And that's why it's so important to surround yourself with communities that care more about seeking truth than they do about being right. Because if you surround yourself with an echo chamber, then everyone's going to only say the things that make themselves agree with that echo chamber. And then the second question is as far as invoking a conspiracy theory, I am always skeptical of conspiracy theories, but I also, the really most important ones, I have fact checked that had some possibility of being true. You know, I fact checked and I looked at the evidence to see what's the evidence for or against it. Because, you know, if you find that there's not really a credible source that is agreeing with that conspiracy theory that doesn't have the same political motive as the conspiracy theory, most likely it's just a conspiracy theory. But like, you know, how, you know, like JFK assassination, right? You know, to think that you know, Lee Harry Oswald was just a lone guy that just happened to want to kill JFK and there was no conspiracy going on, that's hard for me to swallow, right? Like, I think there was more going on than was there on the surface, that this was a lone guy and he got shot dead the same day. That doesn't hold water to me as like a consistent story that is credible. And there were a lot of people that wanted JFK dead. So I don't know which one did it. I don't know which conspiracy theory is right, but I'm open that some conspiracy theory there, it probably is right. I don't know which one, and maybe someday the files will be released about which one it is. As far as your point about every journalist being against Donald Trump, OAN and Fox News are very supportive of Donald Trump. Fox News, except for the stolen election thing, but I think that was partly because they got in a lot of trouble with the Dominion machines, and then they started switching their tune after a very expensive lawsuit. And so there are a lot of journalists that support Donald Trump. The part that I have trouble with is when people say the fact checkers are all liberally biased. I mean, some of the fact checking organizations were founded by conservatives. So you can't really argue that all the fact checkers, and like no conservative would start a fact checking site and have the integrity to actually fact check. So that's where I start to say, you know, you can't really argue that every single fact checker is liberally biased. You know, that becomes unfathomable for me. But there are a lot of journalists that like Donald Trump and say that he's, you know, the sole arbiter of objective truth, which is what I jokingly say to someone when they say that me or someone else is absolutely wrong. No, you just disagree with us. Like, you are not the sole arbiter of objective truth, and Donald Trump seems to think he is the sole arbiter of objective truth. So so that said, anyone else have questions or comments? And thank you. I don't know if you wanted to respond to that, Bill. Sorry, it was a long response.
No, I think we've covered it well. So yeah, we'll get some other opinions here.
Great. Who else wants to ask questions or make comments? These are great. Dominic, go ahead.
Hi there. Bit of struggle here with my lights, so I hope that works somehow.
Don't worry.
Yeah. I was just gonna throw the question into the air about the concept of objective truth, which is an old, topic that has been grinded probably also in philosophy a lot in many meetups. But if I understand you correctly, you work from the idea in your diagrams which you showed in your presentation, from an existence of an objective truth, but you haven't questioned that in itself yet. And I know it's a huge can of worms, and maybe this topic has been grinded through so much that you are tired of it, or the rest of the group. But at least maybe very briefly, maybe you can say something about that, what your perspective is on that. Or are you more postmodern, everything is a construct, reality is a construct, etc., etc.?
Yeah, we're gonna have a topic on postmodernism from Remco, who's one of our regulars and a great guy. He loves postmodernism. I learned a lot about it from him when he presented on Wittgenstein, who is kind of the founder of postmodernism, without realizing it. You're right. I am not a big believer in the postmodern there is no objective truth. Everything is figments of our mind. And the truth is, like, all of the scientific progress from, since the Enlightenment has basically been about understanding objective reality and objective truth, learning scientific facts, creating models that are good predictive models, creating new materials in objective reality that are useful and practical. And it all kind of assumes objective reality is true. And even the people who say that objective reality isn't true, on a day-to-day basis, they act as if it is, because if they acted as if it wasn't, they would go crazy, because they wouldn't know which side of bed to get up from in the morning, because they literally wouldn't know whether or not they were going to fall off a cliff when they got out of bed, because they don't know if that's the objective reality that they're going to encounter when they get out of bed. And so, all I'm saying is, if 3 philosophers are in front of a door and 2 say the door doesn't exist and try to walk through it, they're going to hit their heads and realize there's an objective truth. And so that's the example I give about why I believe in objective truth. I also have an essay, and I did a presentation on the simulation hypothesis, about why simulation hypothesis is irrelevant, because even if we live in a simulation, the winning strategy is to treat it as if it's objective reality. And so I did explore the idea of there is no objective truth. And it's not that I never considered it. I found it very intellectually interesting for a period of time in my life, but I've come to a very firm conclusion that there is an objective reality out there. We're learning about it. We're all understanding it. We're looking at it from different perspectives. There's no one right or wrong perspective, but there is one objective reality that we're all learning about. And to say that the door in front of us doesn't exist, even if it is 99.9% space, yeah, but you still can't walk through it. Like, even if it is 99.9% space. That said, if you have a good reason that objective reality doesn't exist. Oh, by the way, Bill is doing the party hat thing, which I forgot to remind people in the beginning. If you want to respond to what someone is saying, do the party hat, which is under reactions. It's this thing, which Ms. Fawn is doing now too. And so now I'm irritating people by saying I believe objective reality is real. And so we're getting lots of people wanting to comment. And so this will be a little digression. That's fine. We can talk about it for a little while, but let's not spend the rest of the night on it. That said, Bill had his party hat on, but Dominic was the one that asked a question and had his hand up first. So I think, Dominic, if you want to respond, and then we'll let Bill go.
Yeah, it will be brief, and then so Bill does. Okay. I think I save all my counter arguments for the postmodernism meetup. I don't want to open another thread, but maybe we can jump there after we have closed the thread about which we opened about objective reality. I wanted to also question the process of reductionism. I think you like to analytical, take the whole thing, break it into individual bits and pieces, analyze its piece, and so on. I probably can't articulate this very well right now, but from the bit of reading I did and other trustworthy YouTube videos, I've come to the conclusion that there's a lot of value in going a different way, which is more holistic, and that certain truth can be only revealed with a holistic perspective when you look at all the parts working together, and that deconstructing, analyzing part by part and step by step algorithm kind of analytical approach gets you quite far. But there are certain forms of problem solving, you will hit a wall with that. You will not resolve, you won't find answers only by this reductionist approach. And maybe
so just to be clear, I'm not suggesting we should do these things in isolation or use them one at a time or in a specific, necessarily every time the same logical sequence even. But the way that I would put it is, what I'm teaching is how to play musical instruments. And then once I've taught you how to play 8 musical instruments, you can suddenly do a symphony, right? And I think you're right that you have to use all these instruments together to kind of come to, the truth about objective reality. You have to use them holistically, but it helps to practice individual skills one at a time and learn how to play each instrument. Because if you try to go into a Carnegie Hall without ever having practiced an instrument, you're not going to look very good. So
Thanks.
yep, Bill, go ahead.
We're actually in strong agreement about objective reality. I'm a strong proponent of objective reality. You mentioned things like simulations, like the Matrix kind of stuff, but we shouldn't forget that even if I'm living in the Matrix, or even if I am hallucinating everything, or even if I can only trust 5% of the sensory input that I get, that is all that is all objective reality as well. Like that, if we're in a simulation, we're in a simulation. That's the objective reality. If I'm hallucinating half of the things I think of, that in itself is an objective reality. Probably mostly just for me because I'm the one doing the hallucinating, but it's still objective reality. So I have yet to hear anything that can't be deconstructed down to there's an objective reality behind that construct. Right?
Yeah, and the answer that I try to give people, people like there's this concept of a Boltzmann brain, right? Like there's some brain in a vat, and we are just a brain in a vat, and everything that we're experiencing is in the imagination. My answer is, where's the brain in the vat? Like, what world does that live in? Because there's still an objective reality there, and we're a piece of that, which I think is the same thing you're saying, Bill, is that what we experience is still what we experience, and and so we're saying the same thing in different ways, but I think agreeing with each other. So that said, I'll let Ms. Fawn go.
Okay, trying to get active here. Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
I think I'm unmuted. Okay. Well, stepping back a moment, I'm reacting in part to you're saying everything since, and it's all Western thought that you're referring to, as if Eastern philosophy and science doesn't exist. And there are alternative ways of thinking about things. There are different approaches to ontology and so forth than just what's been done in Europe since the 1400s rather. And I think that we do ourselves a great disservice by ignoring the fact that there is this other alternative. And let me put this a concrete example of this, which you brought up. People say that there is no objective reality, that there's so much space, even it's all empty space. Not really, because it is full. There's a reason why you can't put your hand through a wall. But most people never talk about it and don't know what that reason is. You know what holds the world together? Electrostatic forces. It's electricity and magnetism that hold the atom together. It's electricity and magnetism that hold molecules together, that hold walls together. That's the reason why you can't put your walls through it. This is why light gets refracted when it passes through a window, because there's actually there's a magnetic reaction that's occurring as electrons are being stimulated, as the light passes, the photons pass into the light. So we have to expand our thinking. I think I'm not sure who it was that said about looking at things holistically. We can't put blinkers on and then complain when we run smack into a wall. And I'm surprised. I'm all done.
Why do you think I'm ignoring? Why do you think I'm ignoring Eastern philosophy?
Huh?
Why do you think I'm ignoring Eastern philosophy?
You said everything since a certain point of time in European scientific thinking.
What's that?
I know that you are very much aware of Buddhism and a student of it, okay? Right. I know this, but when you make a comment about everything since, and you're making a reference to a point in time in Western scientific thought, There's a lot of other stuff besides that. And that's what I objected to.
Yeah, it was just a comment about objective reality. I was trying to, bolster the argument that objective reality is a real thing. And I do realize that, both Buddhism and Hinduism, sort of say that the world that we live in is a mirage or a, samsara or like a not real. But I would still argue, even they argue that we should treat it as if it's real for the most part. We should transcend it. So
you see, again, that's an odd statement of the Buddhist belief, because, for example, when a Buddhist says there is no self, you have to understand what that's in reference to, because what they believe about how a person is constructed is three huge piles of different kinds of processes going on: objective processes, spiritual processes, and so on. And that we are a collection of three different sorts of processes. So to say the self is, if you can put the finger on it, is inappropriate. But there's not a denial that there's an individual. It's just that it's a bigger thing with all this stuff going on.
yeah, we should have another day.
I look at things linguistically too, because there are languages which, rather than having everything focused around nouns, everything is focused around verbs. There are some Native American languages, some languages in Africa and elsewhere, where the language functions very differently because everything is processed.
Great. Thanks, Ms. Fawn. Bill.
I'm always really slow on the mute and unmute. I was just gonna, just with regards to the comment about Eastern philosophy and Western philosophy, or my bugaboo is Eastern medicine versus Western medicine. In talking about, again, objective reality, I don't think there is an Eastern medicine or a Western medicine. There is just medicine that works or it doesn't work. And, we can bounce back and forth and pulling in, valuable philosophies or theories from both sides. There's definitely bias because we're taught, I mean, in the West, we've been taught based on the Greco-Roman, origins, and in the East, they grew a different set of knowledge, and so each will have biases, but that's just group biases, that's just cultural biases to how we approach things. It doesn't negate the fact that in the end there is one objective reality. In the case of medicine, there is a set of techniques and things that work or don't work, and studies will demonstrate which, pulling from all resources, which works and which doesn't work. So I never classify things along those lines. It's a false dichotomy, in other words, I guess is basically what I'm saying.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you, Bill. I think we're on the same page there. Anyone else have questions or comments that they want to share? Yeah, Dominic.
It's me again.
Have you back?
Showtime today. Yeah, no, I maybe pick up another point that you came up with about research, yeah, and such. So just a thought that came to mind. I mean, how does the average Joe, and I'm mostly sourcing from myself, and is doing research these days? Maybe, I mean, you have academic research. I actually looked for research platforms, and some only really you get access if you are yourself member of some kind of institution, right? So there's platforms where you can then get access to research papers, and you get research tools which make it easy for you to compare data and get access to papers and so on. So this is, I think, one way of talking about research, and there's the job as being a researcher. But then there's, the reality of let's say, I dare say, people like you and me, I mean, for you, okay, running the institute, it's a bit different, but let's say just me as a private person to do research on a certain topic, and this day and age, like you said, now ChatGPT and other AIs are on the rise and so on. And most of the time we Google things, and then we go by the first 3 hits, and maybe we branch out to Wikipedia. Even in Wikipedia, you can check the resources. And I think that's the way how the average person is doing their research and their fact checking these days, And yeah, but I liked how you said that this can be also very misleading with certain search algorithms and the biases that are encoded in it. But maybe we could discuss any maybe recommendations or ideas around what could the average person improve when they want to do their research, considering time constraints. Sometimes I want to fact check, but for example, just to close my points, over years and years, there's a German online news outlet that I've been reading, and I've really recognized, especially due to the way how they report about the Ukrainian war, that it's very biased. And I only realized that, for example, when they report about the war, and that's also where my heart is, but it's in mostly reporting in the benefit of Ukraine, and what progress they made at the front, that they, and the reality is that the Russians did make a lot of progress as well, and then mostly reporting about what the Russians did wrong and where they failed in their strategy and whether Ukrainians were successful. And I know why they're doing this. In a way, I have sympathy for it, but for a news outlet like that, is definitely biased without telling us. It's actually close to propaganda, and it's actually very famous, very well established German. I can tell you which one it is on the chat, but it doesn't tell you much if you're not from Germany, I think. But it's very commonly known. And that's what I realized, especially with the reporting on the Ukrainian war, that a lot is just give me both sides, really, and don't just show me, oh yeah, the Ukrainians were successful here and there and so on, because that's what we all kind of want to hear or something. So what's my question? What can the average Joe do best to do quick, effective research that is reliable, and avoid traps like that?
Yeah, and I did actually try to cover that, and I'm sorry if I didn't do a good job of it, but I'll sort of recap the things that I went over that I think would help with that. Is looking at a 360-degree view where the source you're giving is probably like a left-wing source, right? So look at a right-wing source of the Ukraine conflict with Russia, look at a centrist source, and then anything that sounds suspicious, try to find someone that doesn't have that same bias, especially if that bias is in that source's interests, really only if it is. But usually it almost always is when it comes to news sources. The things that sound suspicious that news sources give are always in their interest, meaning to serve their political ideology. And if it is, then look for someone that doesn't have that same political bias that corroborates that fact. And if you can't find one, chances are good it's made up, because there's probably some independent source that would share that fact if it was real, or some way to corroborate the fact, or the purported fact. So is it super easy? No, it's not super easy, but you really want to do this in the things that are really important. And the time that I started doing this was with the Iraq war, when we were saying that we were going to declare war on Iraq before we had done it. I read right wing, left wing, and centrist. And ever since then, when there were major news events, I do a full analysis, 360 degrees. And then I look, and I have looked for over a decade now, probably it was over 2 decades now, I've kept track of like which sources lie more regularly. And I just stopped having, I stopped believing those sources and I try looking for other sources. But sometimes, like, those are the mainstream sources in that political side. And so you kind of have to use them. But
this way you could equally end up in a total chaos, because you get one information, then you get the contradicting information. Both resources you think are trustworthy, and you're totally left with, I have nothing to believe anymore because I did the 360 and everything is pointing, it's competing forces, and you find yourself in the middle of it. And then you're left with intuition.
It hasn't worked out that way for me, Dominic. Like, what ends up happening is the things that sound suspicious turn out not to be true, and the truth is actually a lot more boring than you would expect. But I guess in the case of the Iraq War, unfortunately, the truth was actually pretty fantastic. And in that case, it was a case where left-wing news, right-wing news, and centrist news were all lying, and I caught them all lying. And I was one of the few people that was not a pacifist, that was against the war in Iraq and the US, because I realized they were all lying. And I won't go into the details of that. I've done it in past events. But, most of the time when you do what you just said, Dominic, the tall tales come out pretty quickly. There's no one to corroborate them. And you go, that's just made up. And then the truth is actually much more boring than you would expect. And really, it's a more nuanced war. Ukraine is making a little ground, Russia's making a little ground here, Ukraine's making a little ground there. And, the war wages on, right? And you get a more clear picture of objective reality. And doing that grounds you in what really is happening, and not the fairy tale life, but a real objective view of how things go down. And seeing that is very grounding. And, I think it helps us make better decisions in life to have that level of knowledge about what's going on.
I think Miss Vaughn wants to jump in.
Go ahead, Miss Vaughn.
Okay, got myself unmuted. Yeah. One of the issues with doing searches is that there is no cost benefit to the providers of search engines to give you good tools to winnow through the results. You do a search on Google and you get 65,000 results. Now, how do you refactor your refactor is the same thing as like rephrase or restructure. How do you refactor your query or those results in a way that you can use them and find what you're looking for? The first 200 results aren't what I wanted, but I know that somewhere there's a site that has it. But how do I get Google to give it to me? And we don't have these tools precisely because there is no cost benefit for Google to provide them. One has to remember that Google was created to sell advertising. That we have these wonderful search engines precisely because they're a way for people to make money. But if you're in academia, it's like I really miss being in graduate school, because when I was working on my PhD in computer science, I had such wonderful tools available. And I think that one has to find ways of, once you've got all these results, making note of them, but then going and as you and that was the German or Austrian fellow I had, Dominic. Yeah, we're saying of looking at the sources. I find that looking at the sources is absolutely essential. Even if you just want to know, is it Tuesday or Wednesday, you still have to know the source. Because if it's Trump, you know he's going to tell you it's Thursday. I'm just using that as an absurd example. but you do need to know the sources of things because scientists can be doing very valid research and get very different results, find out different things. It's like right now, I'm finally admitting to myself because of questions that David and Mayu have been asking me about myself. I live in clutter and I've lived in clutter all my life. If you clean up my space and it's no longer cluttered, I am instantly extremely uncomfortable. Well, more and more in the last year or two, I've been receiving the message over and over that clutter and trauma are related, and that oftentimes this is trauma from childhood. But I wasn't abused in any obvious way. But obviously, I'm suffering from trauma because of my clutter. Well, I just now, and I'm going to stop after saying this, but I just now asked Google for scientific papers published by psychologists about the relationship between clutter and mental disorder. And I get 5 or 10 different articles from the New York Times and all kinds of other articles, but there's not a single scientific reference in there, at least not in the first 3 pages of results.
So, Ms. Fawn, if you want scientific studies, you go to scholar.google.com. That's a search for scientific studies. Google is not meant for that. It's meant for searching the World Wide Web, which is not a set of research papers. The second thing is, it is in Google's best interest to show you the truth, because if they don't, someone else is going to do it more effectively and more efficiently, and they're going to steal Google's business model. And I hate to tell you, but that's already happened, and it's called ChatGPT, because it's a lot faster to get the truth from ChatGPT. But your point about how important it is to look at the sources being critical is key. And I'll tell you, ChatGPT doesn't tell you its sources, even if you ask it. Try asking ChatGPT where sources. It won't tell you. And so actually, I love ChatGPT.
And as a consequence, I do not use ChatGPT to do research. Other people might, but I don't consider it to be an appropriate research tool. Precisely because I cannot analyze what it's giving me.
Yeah, you can't use ChatGPT as an objective source of 100% accurate data. But if you want to ask it a question where, a high sense of accuracy of like 90 to 95% likely to be accurate is good enough, then it's good enough. But if you
absolutely. What was that? Did you say scholar.google.com?
Yeah. Scholar.google.com is Google's ability to search academic papers, and it only gives you the abstract, but it will search the abstract of academic papers. And I don't believe there's any advertising in that part. So that's the good news. And the other thing is Google does clearly advertise when someone is blatantly advertising, but then there's search engine optimization, which is how to game Google, and that like everybody is allowed to do and is allowable, and Google tries to prevent that from being gamed, and they're pretty good at it. But there's definitely let's just say it's complicated. We can go into that if people want. And Franklin, if we have time after the hands, I'll answer the question more about the Iraq War research. But
I'd like to respond very quickly to something you said about the truth is important, because if they don't give you the truth, somebody else will. Well, but it's just the opposite in the news media. Sometime in the last 30 years, they stopped reporting news. They just started reporting sound bites. Sound bites are totally inaccurate. They're only there as clickbait. And if it were true that getting the truth out there is that important, then the media would be doing a better job than it does. But right now, since media has become driven by its ability to generate advertising revenue, if you don't get there first, it doesn't matter what you report. So the person that makes the first report is the one. So newspapers are reporting stuff just because if they don't, somebody else will. And that's not the basis for accuracy or truth.
So I am a realistic optimist, and my optimist side will say that I think that while I agree with your point about most media giving into clickbait and not really reporting what I think is an objective view of the truth, they try to sensationalize everything and they exaggerate things and they tell biased perspectives most of the time. And I'll also tell you the centrists ignore the facts that make them appear biased towards the right and the left. So they don't even give the whole truth either. That's why you have to watch, right, left, and center about politics in the US. All I would say, Ms. Vaughn, is that it's going to take a wealthy person to create a media company that cares about the truth. And if I ever become a wealthy person, I'm going to do that. So, and I think that a lot of us really do want the truth and want a news source that will actually report the truth. I agree with you that I don't think many are really doing that right now, but that's what competition is about. And that's why free markets are important, is a new company can come in and be a media source that really does report meaningful truth and can pull those eyeballs away from all the people who are just giving sound bites. And I think if people have critical thinking skills, they can discern which one is which. The problem is that there are too few people that have critical thinking skills. And so people fall for the sound bites. If we teach critical thinking skills to everyone, then people will actually want hearty, meaty news that actually teaches them the truth. And that said, I want to let Adam go.
Oh, Garrett, I think Anna wanted to jump in.
Oh, I'm sorry, Anna, go ahead.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
What do you think about DuckDuckGo as a search engine?
So I know people that use it. I don't know. I have not researched like why it would be better or worse than Google. So I can't come at that from a place of being knowledgeable enough to answer, to be honest.
Okay, I use it and I find it cuts through the noise a little quicker. I have both on my browser, so I can use Google or I do that, but that's just a suggestion that some of y'all might try it.
Yeah, they're more private. They don't track search history or store your IP address.
I'm sorry, what service was that, Troy?
Called DuckDuckGo. It's a search engine that's more privacy focused.
Yeah, I was going to recommend them too. And they're searching, what they're doing is running searches against multiple pre-existing search engines and collating the results for you.
What I have found, because I have multiple pages and groups and websites, and what I have found is if you try to look for me on Google, you'll have a harder time because I'm further down on the list. But if you do the same search of my pages on DuckDuckGo, I'm at the top of the list. I'm number 1, 2, 3. So when it comes to politics, especially controversial topics, Google is suppressing and is preventing people from knowing other non-establishment sources. Is trying to bring to the top the more establishment type material, whereas DuckDuckGo is just, I don't think it's less doing that. Let's put it that way, and that's based on my own experience with it.
Great. So, Adam, you want to go next? You're on.
Yeah,
go ahead.
sorry. I dropped the phone for a moment. So I guess I'm bringing it into a different topic in terms of there's a now accepted concept of however is the truth is authenticated, the truth has to be more centralized, more promoted than the actual fake one, and the fake news does transport more. And true, and like it's like Gary, it's like what you said, Gary. The truth is most often boring, and I just think in other moments of history of how news needed to be propagandized to garner support. Definitely in the last both world wars, and even in Spanish American War. Remember the Maine, the whole thing that nobody really knows how it exploded, but they just blamed the Spanish. Um, so this is where I go into what is the real world use. How is this going to be working for me to be critical thinking? And I could say a lot of the smart things of like it's going to be, I mean, I could be more consciously observed. I could be less black and white, more objective. Yes, that's all good things. But I truly believe when I go back to my like stuff in my real life, I gotta really handle what is me, my family, my friends, my region of life, and leave all the other stuff to not critical thinking kind of things, and really work on my intuition instead. And I'm not trying to say that's right, but I'm trying to say that's the most realistic because I do think people would want to be less confirmation bias, but biasness is how society is run. We have to root for our government. We have to root for other things, and I believe that other governments, even bad ones, in my view, I'm stuck with the Western philosophy. If there's a society with a communism, well, I'm sure they don't like what their circumstances is, but they have to work with what they got, and they don't go into critical thinking skills because they don't know what to ingest. And I I truly believe that it could have a value, but it's all about the settings. And just like how I come into this room, I have opportunity to come into these rooms. I have opportunity to talk about these things. So, but after the fact, when I go back to my real world, this critical thinking things, I'm it's not gonna hit sway. It's not gonna be valuable in my life. It's gonna be I gotta have to work with my intuition and how life. I had to rub elbows, how to talk to people, and how to present myself. And yeah, I just wanted to put that out there in terms of what is really stopping critical thinking from taking hold. And it's really a top-notch opportunity to even practice that. Thanks.
Yeah, so I'm curious why you think that critical thinking won't be valuable in your life. Like if you can see objective reality more clearly, you can basically make every decision more effectively than you can otherwise, right? And so that's what critical thinking does. It helps you make every single decision in your life better, including intuitive decisions, quite frankly. And in fact, when you say, I just want to work on my intuition, if you're not working on your intuition, also using critical thinking skills, you could go off the rails and you could start making intuitive decisions that completely send you into a tailspin of hell, hell on earth, where you're making wrong decision after wrong decision and you're absolutely miserable and you keep trusting your intuition and it keeps sending you down the wrong path and you keep making those bad decisions. Without critical thinking, you can't right the ship. You don't have a North Star. You don't have a direction to go in. Right. So critical thinking is really like absolutely critical in every decision we make, whether it's an intuitive decision or not, whether it's a reason-based decision or an intuition-based decision. Just to know whether or not your decision was a good one or a bad one, you need critical thinking skills to analyze whether the decision was good or bad. So I would argue critical thinking. Go ahead.
Garrett, you put it into my self-interest, and that's what I was pointing out. We're talking about news articles and everything like that, and the what's happening around the world and all that. But it's my self-interest that's where all my critical thinking needs to really rely on. If I have to figure out I have a disorder or anything like that, I will use it to its fullest extent. That's what I mean by that. But taking in an overload of information of what the world's going on
Yeah.
more than what's needed could actually do more harm than good. I'm not saying be in blissful ignorance, but the fact of the matter is, people, just for one example, people have got to a lot more harsher degrees of hysteria by getting into WebMD and self-diagnosing and everything, and it's just so much distress going around and everything. I gotta like, it has helped me to learn how to let go and only feel what can I control, what can I influence, and that's why I don't think critical thinking skills is much more important outside of your own realm of living circumstances. So yeah.
Yeah, I think if I'm hearing you right, Adam, your point is that you should use critical thinking skills for focusing on the things that are in your control and that affect you on a day-to-day basis, you and the people you love on a day-to-day basis. And if that's your point, I agree with you completely. I think a lot of the examples I've given were politics and stuff like that, but I actually don't watch the news very often. I only, I sort of made allusion to, I only do a lot of research on the major topics. What I didn't say is I don't watch the news on a daily basis at all because I can't control any of that stuff. I care about the major topics where I'm going to have to vote on a politician who has an opinion about these things. And I want to make sure I'm voting for someone that has my values and is going to make good decisions for the world. And so those issues I get well researched on so that I'm voting for a politician who's ethical and wants to make the world a better place. But in general, I agree with you, Adam. We should focus our critical thinking skills on the things that impact our lives and the people we care about's lives. And that's what seeing objective reality and, learning about wisdom helps us do, is focus on what's in our control, which is a good piece of Stoic wisdom, which we're going to have another event. I'm working on a diagram that sort of summarizes the Stoic virtues in a sort of an FTI with an FTI lens. But mostly is drawn from Stoicism that I think you guys will like when we get to it. So did I read that right, Adam? Did I understand you right?
Yeah, and I guess I am practicing more of a limited I'm a I just had the word in my head. Limitalism. I don't want to just put the word ism and think it's the right word. But yeah, less is more, and I'm happier for it. So
it is kind of putting blinders on, not in a bad way though. The reason that blinders are on horses is because they get spooked out if they see everything around them, and they're actually much more effective as horses drawing, in a carriage by not seeing the things around them and just focusing on what's in front of them. And so it's the carriage driver that needs to see the things around them. The horses need to see what's in front of them. So, you're not wrong to focus on what's in your control. I think that's, again, great Stoic wisdom. And I didn't see who had the party hat on. Who was that? Go ahead.
That was me.
Go ahead, Alice.
I was just saying that there's 20 minutes left, so now's the time to raise your hand if you haven't said anything. And next week, we're going to do more critical thinking. I think Eric could tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, at the end, I'll bring the diagram back up and talk about the next week.
Okay, and I also I'm putting in again our Discord community and our membership information in the chat.
Great, thanks, Alice. Bill, go ahead.
Just wanted to open up or go back to one of the topics you covered and open up a little bit of a back and forth on that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Specifically, the concept of authority. Let me just bring up the notes I made. Where did I put it?
Get my light.
Yeah. So you seem to get dangerously close to saying don't trust authority, don't trust experts, but trust your own, do your own research basically, and trust your own feelings, not those of experts. That So first of all, I'd like to ask you to clarify that,
Yeah.
because authority is important when you're talking about
Yes.
Anything scientific or factual or medicine based or something like that. Authority is absolutely critical. And when I talk about authority, I don't mean like Donald Trump just standing up there and being authoritative. I mean people who have actual expertise do matter. Whether it's building submarines or developing vaccines, expertise and knowledge actually do matter.
Yes.
And to go elsewhere can be disastrous. So,
right. So what I mean is, if you, there's trusting authorities. So authorities should have a good argument as well as the credentials. And what I'm saying is don't trust authorities blindly simply because they are authorities. And so, for example, physicists tell us that the start of the universe was at the beginning of the Big Bang. To go back to Will's comment earlier. But if you ask them, well, what was there a billion years before the start of the Big Bang when there was no time, and how did the first moment in time come about? They really don't have a good answer for that. And they should, if they're going to try to get us to believe that time itself started at the beginning of the Big Bang, they need to have an answer for how it came about, and they don't. And I think that my alternative hypothesis on the origins of the universe is a much more logical one, where I can defend that. I can logically defend what happened a billion years before the Big Bang and why we saw what we did at the Big Bang and how all of this works in a very cyclical way. And it all ties together very neatly, nicely, and logically. And there's a logical explanation. So my personal opinion is that 100 years from now, that will be the commonly accepted way. Now, probably not in my lifetime, because these types of things only, these paradigm shifts only happen over time. So the better example for, if you talk about global warming is, yes, trust the experts in that if they measured global temperature since the beginning of Earth's formation and global CO2 levels since the beginning of Earth's formation, trust the experts in what the temperature was 700 million years ago. You don't want to think that the experts are lying about that. But the people who say that, we're at the hottest temperatures that Earth has ever known. Well, actually, if you look back in the graphs, which we did an event on global warming, we're in the coldest 10 to 15% of Earth's history right now. We're in the colder parts. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not a climate change denier. And in fact, what we learned in that event is that the fastest Earth's temperature has ever raised 1 degree Fahrenheit in Earth's history, other than the last 200 years, was in 166,000 years. And in the last 200 years, we've gone up 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's freaking scary, right? Like that's radically faster temperature acceleration. But no one talks about that. Why is no one talking about that? Why is that not the mainstream conversation about climate change? Because that's an undeniable truth that should get everyone on the same page, where we don't have to trust experts. We trust the data that's objective data that all experts can agree on. And it makes an argument that's really hard to refute. But for some reason, that's not the mainstream narrative. And I don't know why. But so I'm not saying don't trust authorities about their area of expertise. I'm saying don't trust them blindly. They should have a good reason, or have a peer-reviewed process for coming to their conclusion that someone else can validate, or have a good reason for, a good logical reason to believe them, as well as coming from a place of expertise. Does that make sense, Bill? Do you see the distinction there?
Yeah, except though that I would say one of the problems is the area of expertise can be complex, and it's not within the wherewithal of all of us to understand how vaccines work, other than to basically trust that the people who do know how vaccines work do know, because they've been successful in the past. And I'm not saying you can't dig into it. I'm not saying don't go dig into it, but I'm saying the problem is almost none of us have the time, the education, whatever it is, to do that effectively. And so there comes a time where we have to say, somebody who is not an expert is probably not giving me good information, because quite simply because they are not an expert. And the person who is an expert, Fauci versus Trump, right? Or I don't even know how to pronounce his name, Fauci or whatever, versus Trump. You know, it's pretty clear who's going to be giving, you know, correct information there just based on reputation and authority. So it's that area where we fund these guys, we pay these guys, we encourage them to become experts, and then it's kind of crazy to then, you know, blindly say, well, I don't believe them.
Right.
You know, it's you know, because I don't have, you know, I'm too busy with life to learn everything about everything. So
Right. And remember, what I said was look at the reputation for being honest historically. Look at whether or not someone is polite. You know, between Fauci and Trump, if you look, you fact check both of them, one has a reputation for being honest their whole career. The other one has a reputation for not. And I won't say which is which, but each person can sort of do their fact checking and follow the fact checkers and see which one is which and use their critical thinking skills to do it. And you can learn which one is credible. And I'm not saying don't trust the experts. And I agree with you that, like, to think that every single country on earth has a conspiracy that vaccines are going to give us the mark of the beast and that they're actually going to kill us instead of save us, like every single government on earth, that's unfathomable, right? Like, we can't get every government on earth to agree that, you know, that human rights are agreeable. Like, so to think that they would all have a conspiracy about a vaccine, like, unfathomable. And that's where we have to use our critical thinking skills to say, you know, what really makes sense here and who should we be trusting? And that's where I think the person who said we have to be cautious, I think it was you that said we have to be cautious of conspiracy theories. You're right, we do, because you know, 99% of conspiracy theories are made up, but there's still 1% that might actually be true. And you know, that statistic is made up, to be fair. I'm just, you know, saying that most conspiracy theories are probably not true, the very vast majority, but there's probably a few that actually are true. They're just very surprising truths. There are, you know, interesting, you know, released government documents about top secret programs that the government did really horrible things. You know, the idea that, you know, we unseated a democratically elected Iran and we did the same in South America time and again. Those sound like conspiracy theories, but they're true. You know, we did unseat a lot of democratically elected governments, you know, through the CIA all around the world, you know, throughout the last 100 years. So those sound like conspiracy theories, but they're actually part of history. And unfortunately, they're a sad part of history.
yeah, there are definitely conspiracies. Absolutely, like there's, you know, a government body makes a mistake, and yeah, of course they try to cover it up, and everybody's trying to save their butts and save their jobs, kind of thing. So yeah, absolutely, there are conspiracies that show up, but it shouldn't be used as a, you know, as an argument for, you know, general knowledge, right? Like the only way I can, the only way my theory is true is if everybody is creating a conspiracy that is broad, you know, massive, you know, sex, covering up massive sex rings or whatever. I mean, it's but yeah, there are definitely times when you say, well, wait a second, you know, that this flies in the face, what this person is telling me is flying in the face of previous encounters. So maybe that person is actually, you know, covering up something, and yeah, we should dig into it. That's the nature of research, right? By the way, on a side note, I'd be interested to hear more about your theory about what happened before the Big Bang. So
okay, let me get you the video. Email me, Garrett at freethinkerinstitute.org, and I'll send you the video of our event on my hypothesis on the origins of the universe. I think you'll find it really interesting. It's, you know, I am just shocked at how simple it is and why no one else has figured it out. But I think it's a much better explanation of what is going on cosmologically. And and I don't want to go into it in too much detail now because it's not the topic for the night, but if you have the questions, I'll cover it.
I'll send you an email.
Franklin's question about the Iraq war. But that said, I want to let Jeff go. How are you, Jeff? Good to see you.
Hey, Garrett. Thanks for a really intriguing introduction this evening to the subject. As I'm kind of listening to you present it and then listening to those of us here who are exploring it and really considering how could this orientation find its way more commonly into kind of a default way of considering things, sort of increase the wisdom available and that's being used to make decisions. And initially, as I was thinking about that, I was going to ask you the question, is there a way to simplify this? But then I decided that I have a different question. And I'm wondering if, because this is in a way what I've heard you do most of this evening, is you have in your head a decision tree of questions. And that's what I hear you doing, in response to any example or any particular decision or idea and I think that if this was expressed as a decision tree of questions, instead of kind of a presentation of principles and statements, that it might be something that could be much more user-friendly to folks to actually apply. And that's my suggestion. And my guess is that this has been done. I didn't look it up on ChatGPT before asking the question, but my guess is that either it has been done, or if it hasn't, it might be a very useful contribution that you could make to that endeavor.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jeff. That was sort of the way that my essay on truth was framed, but it was framed in a little bit of a different, instead of like a decision tree from the beginning to the end, it's like a point-based decision tree where you add points and subtract points based on each decision. And you would run through the list of questions, and then based on each one, you would add points and subtract points, and then you would create a credibility score of how credible this person is at the end after going through all the question and answers. And so that's kind of how I built the essay on trust, is as a decision tree. I think representing it as one is a good idea. Someone presented at the beginning, I think it was DLJ, I don't remember if it was DLJ or someone else now, and someone presented a decision tree about critical thinking.
Right. I saw that, but I want to emphasize one thing. That it's not a decision tree of conclusions. It's a decision tree of questions. And in my experience, there's a huge difference,
right,
in what's on those branches. And so I did see you do that presentation with regard to research and the trustability of sources, but I would extend it to the entire subject. I would extend a decision tree with questions, and questions are not necessarily as easy to formulate as one might think, at least in my experience, especially ones that are adequately simple and really usable by someone who's really not, particularly schooled in philosophy or psychology or logic or any of those things, to sort of reduce it down to, as you said, I'm not sure about a 6-year-old, but let's say a 12-year-old. I really think that could be a very powerful thing. It would need to be questions, not statements or answers, or it would need to be questions. At least that's my experience.
Yeah.
So
I do
That's what
think
I
it needs
offer.
to be questions, but there has to be an answer to the question as well in order to come to a conclusion, right? And so I think you
Yeah,
need questions, answers, and then some way to assimilate those questions and answers. And that's what I was getting at with the essay on truth is I think I have it in I think your point is great, Jeff, and I think you know, I'm going to try to add that to my list of things to do because it would be a good to like actually create it in question form, answer form, and even make it numeric where it's like if the answer is like this, then put this number in and try to create a model for it, which might be overanalyzing it, but I'm an analyzer is my personality type and one personality type set of questions. And so you know, I think it's a good idea.
right.
And it would
Well,
simplify it for
the
people.
answers could get represented in examples. And
Mhm.
so, you know, I've heard you, you know, sometimes go to some planned examples and some, and then try to make a couple of them up, you know, this evening. And having, you know, if you will, sort of vignettes with a purpose, you know, where you apply this thing and somebody could see the answers and they could say, yeah, you know,
Totally.
that's a pretty common situation. And here are the questions applied to that situation. And I see how it led to this conclusion and to a smarter answer than I might have otherwise given at first. And so, and the you know, the examples can be for a 12-year-old or for a 24-year-old or for a 36-year-old or for a 75-year-old. You
Yep.
know, the examples can be for people in different situations, in different cultures, in different stages of life, whatever. And that to see it applied in those situations and just look at the answers and say, okay, these, you know, because the stories or the you know, the story examples, if you will, to which the thinking process is applied really enliven it for people. And they will remember those stories. And if they have a list of those questions, they just might use them when they're faced with something that's pretty complicated and they really don't know the answer. Anyway, just a suggestion. And as my dad used to say to me, yeah, and please be quick about it.
I don't know if I can be quick about it, but I love the suggestion. I did already add it to my list of things to do. I have a list of intellectual pursuits that I'm going to try to do, essays to write basically, but this is a model to create. And so I will try to get to that. And I put it relatively high on the list, but the list is very long. So
if you want anybody to partner with on that, I'm quite willing to play.
Let's
with
do
you.
it. Reach out to me about that, Jeff. If I have a partner, I'm more likely to speed it up. So
yeah,
happy
me
to
as
chat
well.
about that. Cool. Susan, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you. Hey,
Great.
I'm new, so I'm not sure I'm using your format correctly. So stop me if I go sailing off the cliff.
No worries.
Thank you. I heard mentioned earlier the idea that the government might prefer, a kind of government might prefer to have data like the warming of the sun seen one way, and another branch might prefer to have it seen another way. And so back and forth between those two. And that seemed to kind of be the two possibilities that were being looked at. But I had a third idea, one which I am not putting forth as what I actually believe is going on. I'm merely illustrating that there's a third possibility when we get to these things. And like one idea would be, what if it wasn't in the population's best interest to know what's going on? What if we actually were swinging closer and closer to the sun? And I don't think society would run well if we all thought, oh dear God, in 10 years we die. To be very clear, I don't think this is happening. I'm just saying there could be other ideas besides one side wants it this way for their own political ends and the other does it for the other. There could be other things which could be reasons and could be valid and are not one of those two things. And that is it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I don't think everybody only says the things that are, you know, aligned with their political bias. So I wasn't meaning to say that they always do that or that they always lie for their political bias. I see one side lying for their political bias much more than another, or the other. In the US, we really have Democrats and Republicans, although there are other parties. The fact that we have no force ranked voting means that the other parties are more or less irrelevant until we get force ranked voting. And I hope that all citizens will tell our government officials that we want force ranked voting ASAP so that we don't get stuck in this two-party system that we're in. But I agree with you. There are other possibilities. So thanks for that comment. And I'm going to let other people go. I'm going to let Will go.
I think Adam and Shaunik want to go. Maybe they can go quickly after Will, and that would be it.
Okay. Have Adam and Shaunik, if you want to go, raise your hand real quick. But we're after 9 o'clock, so I want to keep it short. So Will, succinct if you don't mind.
Succinct. Thank you very much. SUCCINCT. Succinct. I'll try and keep it succinct. Garrett, well, I was just thinking with objective reality, our inability to ever understand it. As per Don Hoffman, we've got 5 evolved senses, 6 if you include the mind. So if a tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to hear it, it does not make a sound because there is no evolved ear, which is quite miraculous because the ear has to evolve a coalescence of atoms forming an organ which can perceive the sound waves. So we have 5 senses with which to navigate our environment. Obviously, there are other phenomena of which we are incapable of being aware. I mean, even other species have abilities which we do not possess in this terrestrial realm. Bats, for instance, have echolocation. Insects see different colors. So we can never understand objective reality because we've only got 5 senses with which to do it, I would argue. Thank you.
Sure. So we can't necessarily see like a bat, but you know, that doesn't mean that, you know, and we can't see like a bug because although actually there have been simulations of how we think bugs see. So actually human beings have used imputing how a bug might see and showing what it might look like, but we can't really actually see from their perspective about the way their mind assimilates that today. But let's not put it past science to be able to do that someday.
Right? But we can only do it visually. We can only do it visually. There may be other things which are not visible, tactile, olfactory, or taste-wise, and they exist in particles and waves. So whatever the phenomena we can get access to via more advanced technology, it's still confined within the parameters of our 5 senses, if you understand what I mean.
I hear what you're saying, but I don't necessarily agree with that. I would say that, you know, as human beings evolve in hundreds and hundreds of years, we may be able to do things that are unimaginable today. Think about 300 years ago. If you had, you know, if you used a time machine and went back 300 years and described an iPhone, they would lock you up and throw away the key. They would think you were insane.
Oh, absolutely. I agree.
You know, to think 300 years from now, we may well actually be able to experience things from the perspective of an insect. We may actually be able to, you know, like we can already control a mouse with a brain, you know, without any like, you know, use of our senses.
Purely through mental energy. What I mean exactly, Garrett. I'm saying if there are realms beyond that which is fathomable via our senses. So things that cannot be perceived by our senses, no matter which way we look at them, no matter how advanced our technology, we will still be unable to comprehend them because we shall not know their existence, no matter what technology we have. Anyway, I'll leave it there. I know you want to wind up.
Yeah, no worries. So I'm going to do a quick screen share for what next week's going to be. So we're going to talk about evidence evaluation. So the next stage, today we talked about research and information literacy. Next week, we'll talk about evidence evaluation, and then we'll go into these guys here after that, working our way up towards knowledge of objective reality and wisdom. So just want to thank everyone for coming, for the great questions, the great comments, and the contributions, and for listening. So thank you all. Hope you have a great rest of your evening and or morning, as the case is in Australia with Will. And I don't know if we have any other Australians, but great to have everybody from around the world. And hope you all have a great night. I think Ellis put the links in for the online community. If you go to freethinkerinstitute.org, you can join our Discord chat, where we have really good conversations between these events on Tuesday evenings. So would love to continue the conversation with you all there. And Franklin, if you join the online community, I'll be happy to explain the research that I did to learn why I knew that weapons of mass destruction didn't exist in Iraq, even though all the news sources were saying that it did. All right. Hope everyone has a great night. Take care.